Now, I ask you all to turn to this morning's sermon's reading, which is in the Gospel of John. The Gospel according to St. John, chapter 4, verses 16 through 30. This is a much beloved text. It's when Jesus speaks to the Samaritan woman. But we're not going to read the whole story, but we're going to read verses 16 through 30. The reading is found on page 94 of the Pew Bible. The Gospel according to St. John, chapter 4, actually 95, verses 16 through 30. The word of the Lord says, Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." Just then his disciples came. They were astonished that he was speaking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" They left the city and were on the way to him. Word of the Lord. Now, today we celebrate Transfiguration Day, as we've read in our lessons. And last year, on Transfiguration Sunday, it was actually the first time I preached in this church. So it's been like one liturgical year I've been here with you guys. And unlike last year, I'm not going to preach on the Transfiguration text, but because I've already done so last year. I was like, what happens when we see the real Jesus? It's that, we have a foretaste of his glory, our lives are changed, we see him for who he really is. But I chose this text because even though this is not a Transfiguration text, the same principles here apply. The same message here is that what happens when Jesus, the real Jesus, he reveals himself to us. And I tell you that when Jesus reveals himself to us and we see him for who he really is, we are never the same. We are never the same. And this text here is just perfect for that. Now, we picked up with the story already running on verse 16. But when John writes, there are few things that have led up to this point. So in verse 4, for instance, he said that Jesus and the disciples had to go back to Galilee and they had to go through Samaria. Now, if you were the original audience, we would say, hey, wait up. Why? Why did he have to? Because it makes no sense, not geographical sense at least. It's like saying, tomorrow, because of the holidays, you guys are going to drive down to the beach. You're going to go to Santos, to Maresias, or whatever beach you like best. And I say that you have to drive through downtown São Paulo. You say, no, you don't. You just need to get on the road. And then once you get near São Paulo, take the Rodoanel, you go around, and you go down to Santos, right? You don't have to go downtown São Paulo unless you have something to do there. Because if you're in Judea, in Jerusalem, and you need to go to Galilee, what you do, and most Samaritans will also do this, is you go down to Jericho, you take the freeway up the Jordan, because it's better to walk along a river than a mountain. And then you make a right, you go to Galilee, you make a left, you're in Samaria. But Jesus, no, he says we have to go through Samaria, the hilly byroads of Samaria. So the reader is left hanging. Why does he have to? And then on verse 6, John says that they are at a well, at Jacob's well, and a woman is taking a water, and it was about noon. Like, who draws water at the height of the sun heat? No, who does that? Usually you either go early in the morning if you want water for human consumption, or you go late in the afternoon if you want water for animal consumption. But nobody goes at noon unless you're avoiding people. So there are a lot of things in John's storytelling that just raises doubts. Why does it have to go through Samaria? Why is someone picking up water at noon? And then you start to see why. Because Jesus, he starts talking to this woman, and it's interesting that he's talking to this woman. Even the disciples were like astonished when they came back and saw him, because there are like 2 degrees of separation from Jesus and that woman. She's a Samaritan woman. Like, they don't get along with each other, Jews and Samaritans. And she's a woman. It's even in the Middle East today, it's you don't just approach a woman and talk to her. So Jesus is here talking to her, and he asks her for water. It's well water. He asked her for that. And she said, why are you talking to me? Like, well, but if you knew what kind of water I had, you'd be asking me for water. And she's like, what? You're asking me for water. You don't have a jar. And you say you're going to give me water? So she's confused. And then, but she said, oh, you know what? I'll bite. Give me that water. Let me get a taste of that water. Then we come to verse 16, which is where we started reading. Jesus said, okay, go get your husband and then come back. I'll show you the water. And then the woman says, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says, that's right, you've had 5, none of which were your husbands. The one you're currently living with is also not your husband. And then here's the first point of this morning's reflection. Because when Jesus reveals himself to us and we see him for who he really is, we can never be the same, because 1, we confess our sin. She was avoiding people by picking up water at noon, but when Jesus says, you don't have a husband, this much is true. He says this, like, now we haven't agreed on much until now, but this is true. You don't have a husband. And what does she say? She says, I see that you're a prophet. It's like, she's not ashamed to confess. She's not ashamed to confess because Jesus doesn't shame her. Jesus confronts sin, but she doesn't shame her. He doesn't yank out a confession from her. He doesn't torture her into a confession. He's not pointing fingers. He says, you know, it's true. You don't have a husband. You're not living a very godly lifestyle, right? So she feels comfortable by confessing sin. So this is the first point. We finally and boldly confess our sin, because that's what Jesus does with sinners. Jesus invites them. When Jesus confronts sin, and he does, it is not correct to not confront it, but when he does in such a loving and inviting manner that the sinner has no choice but to confess, not because the sinner is afraid of what will happen, but because the sinner is attracted by this love that says, come, there's no sin, there's no speck on your soul that my blood cannot remove. So when we see Jesus for who he really is, we're never the same because we confess sin. We're no longer hide from it. We no longer run from it. We confess sin. And that will bring us something else. That will bring us assurance, as we see here from verses 20 through 26. Because she's now on the right track. She's not there yet. She says, oh, you're a prophet, which is right. Jesus is a prophet, but he's much more than that. And then she seizes the opportunity to get a little theological with him. Look, you guys say that Jerusalem is where you worship. We say it's here in Gerizim, the mount, where the ruins of the Samaritan temple still are. And Jesus doesn't really indulge in this debate. Like he corrects her misconception. Look, salvation is from the Jews. You worship what you do not know. But what really matters, like Jesus confronts sin, yes, Jesus does correct misconceptions, yes, but he focuses on what matters. He says, what really matters is that the Father is looking for real worshipers. The ones who will worship in spirit and truth, because there will be a time, and it's already started, where it doesn't really matter if you're in Gerizim or in Mount Moriah or Mount Sinai. It matters if you're worshiping in spirit and truth, and those are the ones who the Father seeks. Those are the ones who the Father seeks. And so she gets it. She's smart. She has acumen. She has theological acumen. Okay, are you talking about the Messiah? Because we also believe in a Messiah who will come, who will proclaim all things to all people. And Jesus says, I am he, the one who is speaking with you. I am the divine name. I am he. And she's like, whoa, so you're him? So she has assurance. We finally have assurance when we see the real Jesus. Now, to the proud, Jesus doesn't care to give straight answers. When Caiaphas or Pilate asks, are you the Christ? He would just reply, thou sayest, or he would just be quiet. To a sinner, humble sinner, who confesses sin, he says, I am he, I am the Christ. I am the one who's going to lift you up. I'm going to redeem you. So, if you're a sinner who has nowhere else to fall back on, and who's sincerely eager for him, you're one of those true worshipers that the Father is seeking, that Jesus came to seek. So things start to make sense. Okay, maybe that's why he had to go through Samaria. No geographical reason. He wasn't getting a better mileage by going in the by roads. He had to go through Samaria because he had sinners to save. There was a salvation reason he had to go through that. And then, once she confesses sin, she has assurance, the disciples come. Why are you talking to her? Like, they don't ask that, they think it. And she leaves. She drops everything she's doing. She goes back to town. It's noon, remember. So she disrupts everybody's lunch. She goes to the man of Sychar, the man she was avoiding, the elders of the town, who knew about her deviant lifestyle. And she said, look, I have found someone who has told me everything I've been doing. He's not the Christ, is he? Like, she asks in a way that, like, she can't believe it. And she entices them to go look for themselves. So it's very interesting that verse 26 says that, verse 30 says that they left the city and were on their way to him. Okay, we need to see this too. It's such a good thing that happens, that we can't keep it to ourselves. We not only have someone to confess our sin to, confession. We not only have assurance, but then we start witnessing. When we see the real Jesus, we're never the same because we also start witnessing. And this, by the way, is the most effective evangelism tool up to this day. Personal witnessing. Great campaigns and crusades, they might gather crowds of curious people, but the real effective evangelical tool and strategy is personal witnessing. Because once you see the way someone was before Christ, and you see someone the way they are after Christ, and you see this woman, for instance, confessing, look, elders of Sychar, I found someone who told me everything I've done. That's so compelling that they go. Like, they could just say, oh, you're just a nobody. Let me finish my lunch. But no, that's not what happens. The witnessing is so powerful, they have to go see for themselves what has driven such transformation. Because when we see Jesus for who he really is, we cannot avoid but to witness. We cannot help but to witness to other people. Did we not just sing it today? Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. That's why he had to go through Samaria. Not a geographical reason, a salvation reason. Now, I am of the firm opinion that Jesus has people to save among the foreigner, expat, English-speaking people of Campinas and surroundings. Why else would he go out of his way to let a little church like ours survive all this time? This church started out as a church for the American community when it was very sizable back in the 60s and 70s because of seminary and several companies, and not so much anymore. Why does God go out of his way to keep a church like this one alive? I would say it's not geographical reasons, it's salvation reasons. There are people to be saved who happen to be in Brazil and can't yet speak Portuguese. There are tons of churches here in Brazil where people could listen to preaching, but ours is here and will remain here until God's plan for this church is fulfilled. And like we see people come and go, and like we had the Alagbays here from Nigeria. They're now in the US, and they took a little bit of this church with them. We now have a new Nigerian family. It's like if you take a picture of this church over the last 10 years, you see like the makeup is different, but not really. Like God is always bringing in new people and taking them elsewhere. So there's a reason for this church to be here. The same way there was a reason for Jesus to take the by roads of Samaria instead of taking the freeway down in Jericho. And while I would love for each one of us individually to see ourselves as the Samaritan woman here, someone who can confess sins to Jesus, who can find assurance in Jesus, and because that witnesses to other people, I would like ourselves to see the church collectively as the disciples. The disciples. And you know why? Because in verse 30, it says that the Samaritans left the city and were on their way to Jesus. And the disciples are asking Jesus, come on, are you not going to eat? And Jesus says, you're missing the point, disciples. On verse 34, he says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to complete his work. Do you not say 4 months more, then comes the harvest? But I tell you, look around you. In Greek, it's look up, raise your eyes. Look around you and see how the fields are ripe for harvesting. As I told you, John is a great story writer because he picks up where verse 30 left hanging. So the Samaritans left the city and were on the way to him. When Jesus says, lift up your eyes and look around you, who do they see coming? Who do the disciples see coming to Jesus? Those very Samaritans they despised. Those very Samaritans. So individually, yes, please do see yourself as a Samaritan woman. Collectively, though, as a church, we need to open up our eyes to see that Campinas is begging for salvation. We have English speakers in this city who are not attending worship. Let's find them out and invite them in. God does not go out of his way to do things for nothing. There is always a salvation reason. And I pray to God that this little church will keep being a blessing to anyone who comes through, as it's been a blessing in my life and the life of my family, all the days until God is either done with it or Jesus comes back. May he enable us to confess and have assurance and witness so others may come too. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.